Herbert Hoover would be seen as a president who presided over the Great Depression and was unable to do anything about it. He had an enormous amount of compassion for people, probably because of his childhood. He was born on August 10th, 1874, in West Branch, Iowa. At the age of 6, his father died, which was followed by his mother's death 5 years later. This left him, his brother, and his sister orphans. He went to live with his aunt and uncle in Newberg, Oregon, after a short stay with another family member. Hoover didn't attend high school, but he got into Stanford anyway, despite failing most of the entrance exams. This was probably due to the fact that the school was brand new and they could use the enrollment. Hoover ended up majoring in geology and participated in many of the college events while also working part-time. After graduating and a few temporary jobs, he eventually got a position with a London-based mining company in Western Australia. He was well paid, and he was lucky to even find a position due to the economic panic of 1893. Hoover showed enormous potential and was soon made a partner. He was then off to Tianjin, China. After that, he went on his own and began advising mines and their operations. He became known as the Doctor of Sick Mines. In today's money, he amassed a wealth of almost $130 million. He came back to America and married Lou Henry. While he was in London, World War I broke out, and Hoover, along with other businessmen, helped about 100,000 Americans who were stranded in Europe. He also worked with Congress and Woodrow Wilson to coordinate assistance to Europe. He loved what he did in Europe. He loved helping out all those people. And he stated that his private career was over. He was now looking to get in the public sector. He was appointed as the head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Hoover came up with all kinds of schemes to get as much food as possible to our allies. The Food and Drug Administration turned into the American Relief Administration. Hundreds of millions of Europeans were facing starvation at this time. After the war, Hoover raised money for almost 15 million children in 14 different countries. He even helped about 6 million Russians from starving under the Bolsheviks. Hoover eyed the 1920 presidential election, but he really wasn't committed to a political party. He only went with the Republicans because he didn't see that there was any way that the Democrats were going to win. His prospects were slim, however, and he ended up supporting Harding, and Harding appointed him as a Secretary of Commerce. When Harding died, Coolidge took over. The Harding scandals began, but none of the corruption involved Hoover. He took the middle of the road as Commerce Secretary between labor and business, capitalism and socialism, regulation and non-governmental interference. Hoover began regulations on radios due to the growth of the radio industry. Radios had gone from 300,000 in 1923 to people using almost 10 million of them by 1929. He also began what would become the Federal Aviation Administration as the use of aircrafts were growing. He looked into traffic accidents, trying to develop new standards for safety and new rules for the road. Calvin Coolidge decided not to run for re-election. It was an easy path to the Republican nomination in 1928. Hoover was chosen on the first ballot, and they picked Senator John Curtis of Kansas as his VP. The Democrats ran Al Smith, the governor of New York, for president, and Joseph T. Robertson, a senator from Arkansas, as a vice president. Hoover crushed them, receiving 444 electoral votes. He won 40 states and received 58.2% of the popular vote. Smith only received 87% of the electoral votes. He won 8 states and received 40.8% of the popular vote. He lost the popular vote by over 6 million. Hoover saw the presidency as a means of improving American lives. He created the Federal Farm Board to stabilize the price of agricultural products. Shortly after taking office, however, the stock market crashed. Hoover didn't really believe in federal assistance for the unemployed. He felt it would lead to idleness and thought it was up to the states and philanthropic organizations to fix the problem. Congress passed tariffs to try to protect American jobs. Hoover refused to veto it, even though he didn't agree with it. Europeans then rose their tariffs, and trade contracted. Banks began to collapse, and the unemployment rate was almost 12%. By 1931, it was 15%. Hoover didn't like public speaking, so he was seen as cold and out of touch. Homeless encampments were called Hoovervilles. By 1932, the unemployment rate was 23%, and finally, Hoover began to intervene. He provided loans to businesses and local governments. He signed public works bills and emergency banking loans. Banks, however, were afraid to make loans. He raised taxes on almost everything, and still the budget deficit grew. Hoover then decided he was going to deport millions of Mexican Americans to help with the unemployment rate. Prohibition was repealed under Hoover, but he did nothing to help it. He was too afraid of losing the prohibition vote. People had begun to openly flaunt prohibition anyway. He pretty much stayed out of foreign affairs. He sent warships to El Salvador, but he did end the occupation of Nicaragua. He had hoped reducing arms worldwide would free up more money to spend domestically. There were few people that thought Hoover had a chance in the elections of 1932. Republicans knew they were in trouble, and nobody even bothered to challenge Hoover. The Democrats picked Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they clobbered Hoover. Hoover received only 59 electoral votes, only won 6 states, and only got 39.6% of the popular vote. FDR got 472 electoral votes. He won 42 states and got 57.4% of the popular vote. FDR won by 7 million votes. After Hoover's presidency, he would end up being the only former living president for the next 2 decades. Hoover tried to run for the presidency again, but his popularity was just simply in the toilet. Hoover did help, however, with relief to Europe in World War II. But when FDR offered him an official position in the administration to help with that aid, he refused. He didn't like FDR. In 1958, pensions were finally given to former presidents. Hoover took it. Some say because he didn't want to embarrass Truman. Hoover certainly didn't need the money. He and Truman were sort of friends, however. He did write a few books after his presidency, and he died on October 20th, 1964. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for listening.